we have some inherent systemic issues and problems in the current way of doing things without blockchain, right? Like society, economy, whatever you want to call it. And it's not necessarily to say that, like blockchain or crypto would be like replacing them altogether, but it's more so as a tool to, augment all these features, right? And, like people in Bitcoin Cash have developed quite a few, like DeFi platforms. One of them is called BCH Bull, which allows users to do hedging and like going long and going short, completely decentralized. All the funds are locked up in these contracts, and the only external factor is the price oracle. Right now, for most of the wallets, is really geared towards, like transferring tokens and like these kinds of exchanges or onboarding with fiat. But when you look at what the keys are actually capable of, is very, very limiting. Even for something like multi-signature authentication for your transactions, very few wallets actually do support that, right? Very, very few. So it's that kind of like, are you going for utility or are you going for value extraction? And for a lot of these wallets right now, I guess this is partly due to the business model that they're facing, is more so, facilitating these transactions so that they can get a cut of their transaction fees. You don't want, like non-technical people to be putting their life savings and whatnot into these wallets. Great. But at the same time, for the technically savvy people, you don't want to limit their capabilities too, right? So it's kind of like you're not satisfying either or of that spectrum. So for me, like the philosophy, or at least the viewpoint that I'm trying to go for, is that why not try to just enable as much features as possible for everyone to use? Like if you want to expose your private keys, here you go. Here are your private keys. Like the whole point of the covenants and all the stuff that we're working with is such that even if your private keys get compromised, because, again, going back to the analogy of a programmable check, if you already specified who the recipients are and how much payout they need to get, if anyone makes anything different, it's like, hey, you need to pay to Alice for 1 Bitcoin. If you try to pay to Bob for 1.1 Bitcoin, that doesn't work. With the opt-in wallet, I've literally gone up to people and said, hey, here's the contract. Here is a private key to unlock the contract. Have fun with it. And they'll be struggling. It's like, hey, I can't send this to anyone else. Like, yeah, because you're forced to pay out to certain people, right? So it's also, like that kind of showcasing what that difference in user experience would look like.
Welcome to episode 8 of Is This the New Internet? You just heard from Jerry Qian, a Torontonian who needs no introduction, but I'll give you one anyways. You may have heard of Bitcoin Bay in previous episodes. Jerry and his team are the masterminds behind it. Bitcoin Bay is the longest running set of meetups happening in the GTA, with events taking place downtown, in Mississauga, and at Richmond Hill. If you're new to Toronto and are looking to make some friends in the crypto scene, Bitcoin Bay should sort of be your first step. Same if you're looking to create a local community for an upcoming project. Bitcoin Bay is where this community congregates. In addition to the meetups, the Bitcoin Bay team is full of crypto builders. Jerry is working on his own wallet called OPTN, and is embracing both Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Covenants as vital features. I covered Covenants in episode 4 of Is This the New Internet with guest Matt Black. Give that episode a listen after this one. It'll put into context the magnitude of challenge that Jerry is taking on. However, before I get into this episode of the podcast with Jerry, I'd like to thank all the minters of my previous episodes. Episode 7 featured Professor Lawrence Lay and was a Cardano special. This one did some great numbers, and the YouTube viewers can see the list of collectors on the screen right now. Thank you, minters. And, as always, a special shout out for those on the leaderboard who have minted over half of the episodes of Is This the New Internet? You can mint each episode on pods.media. The links are in the description. So let's get to the fortnight butchery of your names. Sorry in advance. I do this because I love you, and I'm very grateful that you keep showing up and supporting this podcast. Here we go. Web3 Ninjas, Rudra, Crypto Badal, Pedro Villela, Frenchie, AISEB, A Tomatomo, Base Students, K Vinto, Wiscott, Rainbow Unicorn Links, 0x, Gia Pedros, Gutsy Heart, Karakum, and Cryptech. Friendly reminder, this podcast is available on all of your favorite apps. If your app supports ratings, please rate the episode. Thank you for all your likes, shares, and comments across socials. All these forms of engagement are the easiest ways to show me that you enjoy what I'm putting together. So please tell your friends if you vibed with this episode. I'm always open to all feedback on how to make this a better experience for you. So please hit me up on socials or email, whichever's easier for you. And now, on to episode 8 of Is This the New Internet with Jerry Qian. Enjoy. I present one of the founders of the fabled Bitcoin Bay meetups, Jerry Qian.
Thank you so much, Marv. And I'm not sure if a fable is correct. We're still here. Yeah, like we're not mythical yet.
From the outside, I see you guys are doing some pretty awesome stuff, and I'm grateful for the effort that you and your team have put in, sort of adding a pulse to the crypto scene in Toronto, adding to the pulse. So yeah, welcome. I'm really glad to have you. You're a technical individual. You are a curious individual digging into the details for yourself. You are very happy with embracing naysayer talking points as well when they are required. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did Bitcoin catch your fancy? And was there a life before crypto for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like quite honestly, crypto and Bitcoin came out very, very randomly for me, I had graduated in 2013 from McMaster with a fairly useless biology degree. And, like in that same year, I think it was in October or so, I saw one of the top posts on Reddit, right? So it's the entire Reddit platform. Bitcoin's hitting all-time highs at $200 or $300 back in, the 2013 days. So, being a fresh graduate from school with a fairly useless degree, it's either go out flipping burgers, knocking on doors, or, try a little bit of luck on, some Bitcoins. And it's funny enough because back then, there was so few ways of actually onboarding. I had to actually transfer some money from my PayPal account to this this exchange for in-game tokens. It's like a platform for that, right? But it also listed Bitcoin for it. So that was basically like the roundabout way. I had to go deposit money into this random, it was called Linden dollars. I'm sure they're not around anymore. But after that, then buying the Bitcoins and then depositing those Bitcoins directly into Mt. Gox because I saw they had the highest prices. So yeah, that was my indoctrination by fire, or being thrown into a deep end right there.
So at that time, did you see Bitcoin as this alternative to the money system, or was it more of an internet curiosity for you? When did you perceive it as a means of transmitting value first?
So I think, and I think this would have been just when I was graduating or doing my finals, but I do recall seeing posts about the Cyprus, the Bank of Cyprus and whatnot, the central banks, or whatever banks, basically doing a bail-in, right? So, like when I got into school, it was, post 2008. So a lot of the focus was really on the economic side of things. And, obviously when you see, like a bank take money from the depositors and then say, hey, you only get 60%, but we're still going to survive. It's a bad deal, but obviously, do you have to, right? But I think it was also around the same time where, like Bitcoin was going up from $10 to 100 or so, or 200 or so, whatever the peak was, right, at that time. And I think like that basically seeded something, it's like a subconscious memory that, like Bitcoin could be, worthwhile for something to hedge against all this central bank inflationary policies and whatnot, right? So yeah, if it's a digital currency, they say that, it's a lot better. It has all these properties of whatever, blah, blah, blah. Why not throw in some $40? If I lose it, it's like a good night out, right? Have some few drinks here and there. What's the difference?
Was there something in the local atmosphere over here that encouraged you to dig a little deeper into it? Like, were there any friends in the real world who are also into this, or was this a solo journey with your online friends?
It's kind of funny because it's neither. Neither my like none of the friends and whatnot, right, were interested in or like even knew about this. And it was literally like so I bought my first Bitcoins, I think back in October, November of 2013. Promptly lost it, saw the whole Mt. Gox crash. I think like it crashed finally in February. And since I only had like $40, I didn't even bother to go through with the whatever the payout the stuff that they're doing now. But yeah, no, quite honestly, it's like again, fresh graduate, not much job prospects. Gotta find something to do, right? Stay out of trouble and whatnot. And that's where, I was just looking up, like Bitcoin, Toronto, like what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And that's where I think in 2014, I think summer of 2014, I saw the Bitcoin meetups that Anthony Diurio and the people at Decentral were running. So apparently, like they had a conference, like prior to me like attending and whatnot. So when I joined, it's like everyone's like, "Oh yeah, this is great, event, blah blah blah." It's like, cool. This vibe looks, pretty cool back in 2014, right? So, yeah, it's a lot easier when you're unemployed at 22, 20, something like that. And yeah, it's like just there's something that's very obviously new. It's bringing in a very very diverse group of people. Even back in the day, right? We saw like people who are in the mid 50s, 60s, close to retirement or trying to switch their like professional careers or whatever, right? Students, and it's just like it was just nice to see, like all these people coming together and, just sharing ideas, sharing all these kind of insights. What exactly is Bitcoin? How exactly is this supposed to be, immutable, right? And funny enough, like back in the day, a lot more people were really curious, like the everyday folks were a lot more curious on how exactly all this technology works. Whereas today, it feels like a lot of this kind of stuff is taken a little bit more for granted, right? And yeah, it's also like just like a decrease in overall curiosity, but overall, like back in the day, it was very, very vibrant. Everyone's like new to the space. Everyone wanted to figure things out. So yeah, it's like, what else am I supposed to do?
Could you help me bridge from that initial understanding, joining the meetups, and then starting your own meetups? What was that process like? How long did it take? And were there any realizations and new information you took on that sort of spurred you on to that next step?
Yeah, so the meetups at the Central, like at least when I was like going there in the beginning, it was still a lot more of like, like meet and greet, networking, stuff like that. Eventually, like they did set up a bit more of like, like talks, workshops, especially when, Vitalik came and demoed the whole Ethereum beta client, I think, alpha or beta client. But yeah, it was essentially what would happen every single time is that we will have the meetup at the at the house, right? The Decentral house back in the day, 64 Spadina. But then afterwards, we will all go to a local bar to, have some drinks, have some food and whatnot, right? So what we thought was, like, why not skip all this? Why not go straight to the bar? And when I tried to convince the bars to actually take crypto, right? Because, like we don't really know people and whatnot, but we knew that there was a lot of people that were coming into the space. This is very, very new. And a lot of the technical stuff are, even going over my head back in the day, right? So, yeah, so a lot of it, was just like, how do we actually create that environment where people want to come out, hang out, talk about, Bitcoin, whatever else, blah, blah, blah. Even back then when I joined, there was like over 1,000 other cryptos on their own blockchain and their own networks back in the day. But yeah, it's like, what exactly is Bitcoin? What exactly is all this? Some of the basic stuff that quite honestly, like the Vitaliks in the world should not be answering every single time. All right. So, yeah.
So in those early days, like what was the scene like in the sense of content creators, entrepreneurs and builders? Like, did you see anything being put in place over here in those early sessions that may have influenced the crypto space today? Other than, of course, Vitalik.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously you have the exchanges, right? Like everyone's, like especially back in the day, like whatever exchanges you want. And, I might get some flack for this, but back in the day, there was no regulation. So it's not like, hey, Bitcoin's this uh retirement saving fund or my golden goose egg ticket or whatever, right? No, it's always if you put money into the exchange, it would be like Mt. Gox, where you get all your money pulled out or like, scammed and rug and whatnot, right? So there's a lot more, just like personal due diligence back in the day. But overall, for a lot of the small businesses trying to adopt Bitcoin, it was mostly, still focused on using it as a form of payment, right? And unfortunately, like, that's where, like real life business and like non-crypto kind of stuff, like if you can't pay your rents or, like whatever other costs, then it's like, I'm sorry, you have to close your business, right? But also I think, like especially back in the day before there was all this, like awareness, blah, blah, blah. I don't think the market was just, like big enough for that kind of retail kind of like adoption. Whereas when you actually had a lot more people come in, like let's say in 2017 or so, the fees were, just driving everything up to the point where it makes no point and it makes no sense for a lot of these smaller businesses to be accepting Bitcoin. Like a glass of beer at some of these bars might cost $5 back then, right? But the transaction fees would also cost $5 on Bitcoin. So again, like, what's the point on that one, right?
Let's focus on Bitcoin Bay. Shout out Lisana Gaib, earlier guest on the podcast. You were there together in the earliest days of Bitcoin Bay. What was that like in the sense of convincing people to firstly meet up to talk about this magic internet currency? What was your sales pitch like in the day? Because I know now everyone just come to the Bitcoin Bay meetup, but back then I'm sure you had to convince people. How did you go about this?
Marv, I'll tell you a funny story. There were several several meetups during the winter of I don't want to say 2015 or so, where at the time it was just me and Antoine left Antoine is another co-founder and organizer of Bitcoin Bay meetups, but it was just me and him organizing things, and sometimes it would just be me showing up. So, yeah, no, quite honestly, I've done very little promotion of things, right? I show up to a bar. If anyone wants to come and drink, great. Then we can talk about Bitcoin and all that stuff. If not, hey, I have nothing else to do. Literally, it's like there will be times where like, hey, I'm here and there's no one else for big. To be fair though, like Bitcoin price at that time was probably like under $200. So there's no enthusiasm whatsoever, right? The funny thing is, in the new year, right afterwards, there will be about 6 people who show up. So yeah, it's, what I kind of, just surrender myself to is the philosophy of price essentially just tracking the overall sentiments. Although in recent years, I think there might be a slight decoupling on that aspect, but at least for Bitcoin price in the early, I would say pre-2020 days, it fairly accurately tracked the overall sentiments of the market.
Was there a moment that made you think, oh yeah, we can totally do this for the next 5 years?
It's my mentality back in the day was, like there's so much central bank monetary, like inflationary policies and whatnot. There's essentially just printing money, right? And you got to think, Bitcoin or, like precious metal or whatever, stock and whatnot, it has volatility. It can go up or down. But the fiat currency is guaranteed to go down, right? As evident with all this money printing, right? So yeah, it just means that everything else would be more expensive and there's no point in staying onto a sinking ship, right? So that was basically my mentality. And, like overall, like with the tech and all these, I have to say, like it helps to have a lot of naysayers in the space, really questioning a lot of I wouldn't say necessarily assumptions, but the underlying properties that are being sold with like Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain, right? Because if people do want to put in their life savings, they need to know it's actually a safe asset, right? And safe not in terms of just you having it, but you being able to use it whenever you want, right? So that's where like Inevitably. And that's where also, like in the same time period where, Ethereum was coming out with all the smart contract development. So it was really just a matter of time that we figured that, people will slowly catch on to what this technology would be capable of. Not necessarily releasing products in production level into the real world, but at least creating a good enough sandbox to see how it actually stand against, like real world industries and real world adoption.
So you mentioned the naysayers. Is there any particular naysayer perspective that you think we should not be overlooking as an industry?
I've always said this about Bitcoin and quite honestly, any form of money, right? Without people and a community around it, money is useless. Like if we were isolated in our own island and whatnot, all the money in the world would be absolutely worthless to us, right? We can't use it for anything. So I would say, like definitely don't lose sight on the community aspects, right, of all this, because like it's again, people are willing to put in their retirement funds, their life savings, or God forbid, like other people putting in their loved ones and families, life savings in there. So yeah, like have some like healthy discussions on these kinds of things, and just try to be a bit more open-minded, right? Talk to people, reach out, and talk to not just like the KOL influencers and whatnot, but also to developers and people actually working on the technology, because they know a lot more intimately where the current gaps and pitfalls are, right? And quite honestly, like the marketing folks are just not going to be promoting that or not be able to understand it.
So let's talk about the events that you host a little bit more, because I think it'd be really interesting to think about how have the expectations of you as a host and Bitcoin Bay as a collective in hosting these events changed like before COVID and post-COVID?
So here's been at least my personal philosophy in all the meetups and whatnot. We don't want to dominate the whole scene, right? So if people, like don't think that, the format that we're doing it or how we're doing things is, suitable and whatnot, we would actually actively, encourage them to, do their own meetups, right? And we will most of the times go out, like I will at least personally try to go out to as many of them as possible. One, I don't have the time or the effort to put in all those meetups, right? I'm sorry. If you have your own specialized, topic, like we're blockchain agnostic, right? We have Bitcoin Bay in there, but quite honestly, that B, I need to talk to our designer, but we need to change the logo to capital B instead of lowercase b. Because the capital case B back in the day was not just talking about the currency itself, right? Not what you see it's listed, but the overall network, the overall community, the infrastructure, all of the capital being put in, like everything combined, right? So you can kind of think of it as, like the Web3 whatever, but I guess, like on the marketing side, that's been lost throughout the years, right? For us, really, the sign of success is not necessarily taking other people's feedback at face value, but more so getting them to express what their feedbacks were originally, right? So, like we can't do everything for everyone, but we can encourage everyone to do their own things, right? And then share that with the community. So that's the kind of like philosophy and whatnot that we're going for. And quite honestly, it's just more efficient that way. I do not have that much time or the efforts to do all these events and meetups.
All right, so then let's use this next question as a bit of a call to action. If someone was going to start a meetup right now, let's say April 2025, what advice would you give them so you can skip some of those growing pains that you had to go through and just start getting those right people in the room and talking about awesome stuff together?
Yeah, step one is find that room. So find the right venue partner that would have you guys, like come there reliably, or at the very least have a choice, basically a selection of venues that you can cycle through, right? So once the venue is locked down, then quite honestly, it's just building up the hype, right? It's like, hey, we're having this event. Hopefully, it's at a good time for people. Obviously, it's like you don't want something early in the morning because no one will show up. Evenings usually the best, but whatever, right? And yeah, just create the event page, right? It's very, very basic. It's nothing technical whatsoever, right? Just create the event page, start getting the registration, start pushing out onto social media. If you're in chat groups, or if you're not in chat groups, join some chat groups and start promoting these events, right? If a particular chat group doesn't want, certain topics on that event, then whatever, right? Stop posting those events there. But that's basically it's word of mouth, right? Whether you're spreading word of mouth on these larger social media platforms, or like in these Telegram or WhatsApp groups or whatnot, just let people know, right? Build up the hype, and so that would be like phase 1 and 2, I guess. Step 3 afterwards is like once you have something more recurring, get people to help out, right? Like there will be people that like really likes the kind of like events and whatnot, the kind of like themes that's being put on there, and like empower them, right? Like assign them tasks if you need to, have them be co-organizers, whatever. And yeah, just like get people to help out, get people to be involved, get a team, and spread the burden, right? You don't need to do everything by yourself, and nor should you, right? Afterwards, quite honestly, it's like just however you want to grow at that point, right? Be courteous and be polite and like being like good working whatnot relationships with everyone that you interact with. But other than that, yeah, that's basically it.
So could you tell me about how Bitcoin Bay has evolved over the years? Like your team, your vision, your understanding of a roadmap and how you plan future roadmaps. What have the last 10 years taught you, like in a higher level?
For Bitcoin Bay, I think we've seen the whole evolution of the tech in terms of how people came to approach it, from the whole enterprise blockchain to the ICO waves and DeFi, NFT to today to meme coins and whatnot, right? But we also see a lot of people behind the scenes actually building out projects that like they can't, for one reason or another, they just can't market it as like as wide as some of these meme coins can, but for good reasons too, right? But no, like I think overall it's kind of like we have some inherent systemic issues and problems in the current way of doing things without blockchain, right? Like society, economy, whatever you want to call it. And it's not necessarily to say that like blockchain or crypto would be like replacing them altogether, but it's more so as a tool to augment all these features, right? So like obviously we've seen the central banks or governments or like nation states trying to adopt like crypto or blockchain for one use or another. Like that still drives certain kind of like adoption paths that people would want to take about, without saying, hey, like we're just going to crash the entire system, we're just going to restart, we're just going to use everyone's going to be on crypto, right? Which quite honestly does not make sense and is not sustainable. You need a lot longer runway to make that sustainable, right?
Yeah, I get that, because it's very easy for us to say, oh, this is terrible, tear it down. But the more you look into it, you understand its intricacies, but also you understand its flaws, and you can start deploying things in a more limited sort of way. So yeah, I completely vibe with that.
Yeah, incremental adoption, and also just like seeing where the technology and, well, not just the technology right now, but obviously like with the tokenomics and whatnot, like there are definitely a lot of ways to incorporate that experience into aspects of the real world, right? So again, it's I see it as more complementary rather than competitive, right? So for example, in gaming right now, there's a lot of people trying to push like all these tokens and all these stuff on gaming, but Gabe Nowell and whatnot is flat out saying like no.
Yeah.
Like,
Epic is saying yes, but also they're not exactly making a lot of friends by saying yes.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of sentiments and whatnot that especially for people that's not in the space, right? Because if you're talking about adoption, that's what you're talking about, right? People who are not in the space. And for people that are not in the space, especially in the gaming side, right? It's NFTs and all this kind of stuff has become a joke, right? A meme that everyone's like, oh yeah, no, we're gonna launch an NFT on this streamer's bald head or whatever. Right? No.
Another interesting thing that you guys are doing at Bitcoin Bay that I wanted to talk to you about was the coworking. What are you guys building over there? What's the one string that keeps everyone together within the co-working zone?
Quite honestly, I think, the COVID lockdowns have quite a lot to do with that. Like everyone's been too used to working from home and, like lacking, social interactions and whatnot, right? So, and it's not just us, having these kinds of co-working sessions. There's, crypto, non-crypto, just general tech, just co-working in general. Because it's mostly about, like bouncing the ideas back and forth and having that kind of like more lively discussion, right? Especially if, if say you're a coder and you're just stuck on whatever, it's good to, just divert your attention somewhere else for a slight bit, and then it's like, hey, come back with a fresh perspective and then go about it, right? Same thing with marketing ideas, and it's like, hey, maybe there's something that I didn't think about that, this person that I was talking to, right? So yeah, that's overall the kind of like collaboration, I guess, that we're trying to like foster a bit at the Bitcoin Bay office. Otherwise, quite honestly, it's a fairly lonely place. Sometimes it would just be me at the office.
All right. So I seen a few updates and posts about Nostr building meetups there. I found that pretty interesting. It's part of the Fediverse. This is a podcast about the new internet. And I've mainly been looking at crypto so far, but Nostr has embraced crypto in a non-crypto part of the decentralized web. So could you catch the folks up a little bit on, firstly, what Nostr is, why would people want to build on Nostr, and how can meetups like the ones you're hosting help promote further building?
Yeah, so I'll actually just add in there. So we're just hosting it in terms of providing the venue, but it's actually a guy called Paul Mullins who's actually running the entire event. So he's very, very big into Nostr and incorporating that. And for those who don't know, Nostr is basically a decentralized social media platform or protocol. And for the developers that are interested, it's basically a way for you to design and custom tailor that kind of social media experience without, like platforms like Reddit or Twitter, like X nowadays, like censoring you or potentially censoring you for whatever reason, right? So, like it's basically you're able to provide your own filters, you're able to provide your own cater experience, however you want to build it. If people don't like your censorship, quote unquote, or how you're presenting things, they can, develop their own experience, right? So yeah, it's a lot more. And I guess like it's still early stage, but it's a lot more open and kind of like, again, crafting that experience for the users to actually onboard, right? So from how I understand it, it's fairly easy to jump from one of the apps or the experience and whatnot to the other, right? So it's not like you have to jump from one chain to the other, like in blockchain crypto like that.
I was quite pleased to see a Lightning Network address over there. It's nice to see Bitcoin actually being used in a way like this, because everyone seems to believe that Bitcoin is just a store of value. Its only use really is to sit on it, not really just hold, sell it one day when the price explodes. But over here we have actual utility built on top of the Bitcoin network. What are your thoughts on this? Do you see this as a potential for further applications on the Bitcoin network? Or is it just a little, small cornered off experiment?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately, right? You will need to have Bitcoin used on some sort of, real life level, right? Because otherwise, if it's completely detached from real life, that means, Bitcoin's not even connected to the exchanges anymore, right? So that's completely cut off from the US dollars and whatnot. But yeah, like ultimately, it is not it is never a bad thing for people to try and experiment on how to use the technology that they're given with, right? Um, and like for Bitcoin right now, like one of the other things that they're really trying to discuss and trying to like sort out is how to implement something like covenants, which is for your listeners who don't know, it's basically you can think of it like a programmable check. So kind of like the check that you pay to your landlord and whatnot, right? With all the advance check for checks, but the idea is that all these kind of things open up possibilities where they weren't really, like the tools weren't really there before. So things like Nostr, where you can have all these social media platforms and ways of communication and whatnot, you can design it in such a way that people haven't really seen how, it's interacted with, right? And the nice thing is, it might take off, it might not, but there's always, like some sort of progress to actually gauge what actually works and what doesn't, right? Even in failures, well, which aspect of the failures was actually the cause, right? There are some components that are perfectly working, perfectly, good to use. Yeah. So overall, like I would say it's a lot better to encourage this kind of experimentation, as long as like you're not breaking other people's projects, right? It's like keep your project, like within yourself contained, or at least not threatening other people's performance projects like that. Will be pretty good. Yeah.
So that's a pretty interesting point, because the previous guest on the podcast, Matt Black, who I met through one of your meetups, chill guy, he spoke about the difficulty of implementing changes at the network level on Bitcoin. But you're here building applications. How is that different in the sense of, is that complexity still there? Do you still need this sort of consensus to do stuff in this sort of a way? How does that work when it comes to deploying services or services adjacent to Bitcoin that use Bitcoin in some sort of a way?
Yeah, so Matt would definitely know that I'm a big fan of Bitcoin Cash. Funny story, I actually converted all my Bitcoin Core into Bitcoin Cash back in 2017 or so. Yeah, 2017 or so. Like it's a decision I made where it wasn't necessarily on the prices, but it was more so foreseeing that there will be bottlenecks in what kind of capabilities would be enabled on Bitcoin Core, right? So, like since 2019, when I really got into Bitcoin Cash, and it's kind of funny because I have to thank those guys, like Matt and Tony, the guys at Atomic Finance, because they were the ones to refer me to a guy who was creating a compiler for Bitcoin Cash for all the scripts for the transactions. And that's, basically my indoctrination to Bitcoin Cash. It's like, hey, this looks something very similar to Solidity and Ethereum, but it works perfectly fine for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Core, at least Bitcoin Core back in the day, right? And Bitcoin Cash. So yeah, it's like seeing all the different changes and whatnot. It just got me onto that kind of road. What's really funny nowadays, is that he's actually asking me for, like how exactly Bitcoin Cash is enabling all of this covenant stuff, right? Because while Bitcoin Core is still debating on how to actually activate it, Bitcoin Cash had activated, not exactly in the same implementation, but the same principles and the same outcome back in 2022. Right, so there's been several years of building. People have made all these fancy DeFi platforms and other kind of stuff with it. So there's like a bit more familiarity with how the technical intricacies work. But yeah, it's like on social media, on X, on Twitter and stuff, and constantly egging on the Bitcoin Core people to just finally sort out how to activate covenants and convince the people who are naysayers to not activate it.
Okay, so this is actually really good, because for crypto enthusiasts of a certain vintage, the Bitcoin Core versus Cash debate was a seminal part of the lore. So I think quite a few of my listeners may not have been involved in the crypto space at that time. So could we go over this history of animosity, collaboration, betrayals, civil war, and the rebuilding and all that happened with Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and the parties. I think this is a time for a nice little story session, lore dump.
I unfortunately think it's going to be a rather short story, because quite honestly, I don't know the details, the intricate details behind the scenes, right? But I do know that for a lot of the quote unquote limits that Bitcoin had early on, back when Satoshi Nakamoto was still making changes onto the protocol itself, um, I think quite a few people have discussed and talked about this in other podcasts and other shows and whatnot. But essentially, with the way that the code was committed, it looked like it was a one-man job, right? There was no kind of discussions, there was no like pull requests, anything like that, any sort of issues coming up, or at least not many. And it was just massive changes almost every single day, stuff like that, right? And I think it was up until when Gavin Andresen, Gavin Andresen, right? Who was one of the early Bitcoin developers working with Satoshi in the Bitcoin project. I think he asked Satoshi, what are all these scripts for? Right. So all these scripts which are basically the foundations on how addresses secure all the funds, how everything's being locked up and secured, right? So after going about it, whatever, blah blah blah, like very very shortly afterwards, like you saw changes like the maximum block size, how many opcodes are in a transaction, how much, blah blah blah, so on and so forth, right? So it was just a whole list of hard-coded values that is completely arbitrary, and it's really only there to make sure in the early days that like no spam attack and anything like that will overwhelm the network and just bring it down, right? Unfortunately, those have just more or less kept in place after Satoshi left, so no one really knew what to do with those values. And in early days, there was no problem, right? There was not that much adoption, there was not that much usage anyways, so no one really cared. I think it was up until 2017 or so where the block sizes was regularly hitting the 1 megabyte size, and it was very clear there was going to be a backlog of transactions in the mempool, right? To the point where I think like some transactions were actually lost because they were all just stored in memory, so like the RAM of computer, right? So so a lot of those things were happening, and like at the end of the day, like when transaction fees are also going up because everyone's trying to get their transactions processed, like it really drives down the actual application, like the utility of an open, decentralized, permissionless digital currency, right? So it's if like if one side does not want to raise the block size, then eventually you're going to have some issues. And Lightning works, blah blah blah, but there's a lot of posts about like Lightning not working when you need it to. So like again, it's mostly a personal choice for me, but I would say like for how we actually got here, it would probably be best to read up some of the books like Hijacking Bitcoin, right? Or the Block Size Wars or whatever. Just like get some perspective. There's a lot more references, documentation, quotes, whatever you want to call it, and yeah.
All right. So, from a developer's perspective, is there anything functionally different to building an application on Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin Core?
Functionally speaking, no. Right? There's a huge difference if you're talking about Ethereum or Solana or some of the other, account-based chains compared to, like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, any of the UTXO chains. So on that front, it's how the architecture of the chain is set up is just that different, right? But if you're just talking about like a fork of the same chain, then it's functionally the same. What I would say is different is the set of tools that people have created and developed and given to the open source community to actually work on these things, right? So I mentioned the cache script compiler, which again, it's a way of writing code that's very similar to Solidity and all the smart contracts that Ethereum people release. and run it on Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, right? Unfortunately, the Bitcoin Core people have just not, adopted it. And I keep asking people, it's like, why don't you guys use something like this? Right? And apparently, people just like to handcraft some of the opcodes or something along those lines. Like it's
You mentioned when you were chatting earlier when setting this up that you're working on a wallet, and this is a wallet that works on both Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Cash, and to get some of these other more advanced functions that you mentioned, like covenants, into a single platform. So, firstly, what drove you to creating this wallet? Was there not a wallet out there that you could have used for this for your own purposes, or do you really see an opportunity here to build for something like this?
Yeah, so for the wallet side, for the opt-in wallet, which is the wallet I'm building out, it started out as, like again, seeing what CashScript was able to do back in 2019 and wanting to put it on a mobile platform, right? So because, there's so many meetups, there's, in-person conferences and whatnot, I can't bring a laptop and show people what I'm talking about. I was like, I need to bring a phone. And so in order to do that, it's like it has to be in a wallet format, right? So there's thankfully, like even till today, there's still a lot of open source wallets that people can help out and jump onto and implement their own features, right? So back in the day, that was basically what I did. We implemented a very, very simple and very, very primitive wallets that allowed for all the CashScript contracts to be functional, right? So things like adding passwords onto the address or the wallets that you create, having multi-party people, so on and so forth, right? So even back then, like obviously, like COVID and the lockdowns put a hamper on it, but even back then, like the vision was there to see, like the compostability on making these transactions, right? And it's kind of like a paradigm shift compared to working with Ethereum, where in Ethereum, your main focus is on your one specific contract that you deployed. Whereas here with a lot of the UTXO models, it's more so transaction per transaction per transaction. So one transaction only controls the rules to how to spend it. But if you spend it to another transaction that controls a different set of rules, that completely changes the game, right? So you can imagine, passing things like tokens or whatnot, but each step you have different rules and different conditions on how it's to be spent or who you're even allowed to spend it to, right? Yeah, so it's fairly flexible in that kind of design aspect. And, like people in Bitcoin Cash have developed quite a few, like DeFi platforms. One of them is called BCH Bull, which allows users to do hedging and like going long and going short, completely decentralized. All the funds are locked up in these contracts. And the only external factor is the price oracle, right?
So let's talk about the wallet a little bit because how have our expectations of what a Bitcoin wallet should have changed over the years? Because if you look at some like Electrum, it's sort of been the same for like 8 years now. If you look at Exodus, they've not changed too much. They've added a few incremental things here and there. So what's the market saying about expectations for a wallet? And what do you personally believe wallets should be giving their users in 2025, especially if they're dealing with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so right now for most of the wallets is really geared towards, like transferring tokens and like these kinds of exchanges or onboarding with fiat. But when you look at the like what the keys are actually capable of is very, very limiting, right? The way I kind of look at wallets is think of it like a Swiss Army knife. You need the different tools to do different tasks, right? And right now, for most of these wallets, their primary task is still just, just sending basic tokens around, basic coins around. But they don't really add in that much more breadth, right, into what other tools you're able to do, or you're able to work with. Right now, a lot of these wallets are quite honestly relying on Wallet Connect integration. And for those who don't know, Wallet Connect is basically a tool for websites and other web platforms to connect with your wallets, whether it's mobile or whether it's extensions or so on and so forth. So when the utility is tied to another person's platform or some other party's platform, it doesn't really enable the end user to have control over how, whatever funds are being used, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, like logging in and whatnot, that's pretty good. It's great, right? It's a good step and it's in the right direction. But the wallets themselves should have a lot more of those functionalities built in natively, right? You shouldn't rely on a website that you need to sync up and scan a QR code to then getting access to.
So, yeah, Wallet Connect is something that I use quite a bit. So you're saying that there's a way to skip this using option and it'll work natively without relying on someone to like sort of handle that verification for me?
I wouldn't say exclusively, like it would be an additional feature, right? So for some of these, like for example, I'll give you an example, right? I haven't really come across any sort of wallet that allows or enables the user to create their own tokens.
Okay.
Right, just on the spot, on your wallet, boom, boom, boom. Like maybe there's some out there, but I haven't really seen that, right? There are other things like, like what about for startups? You have to hold on to your funds, right? Even for something like multi-signature authentication for your transactions, very few wallets actually do support that, right? Very, very few. So it's that kind of like, are you going for utility or are you going for value extraction? And for a lot of these wallets right now, I guess this is partly due to the business model that they're facing, is more so, facilitating these transactions so that they can get a cut of their transaction fees, right? Whereas the way I kind of see things is it has to be, like tools focused. It has to, like be useful. Like what's the utility of the wallet? What does it enable you to do, right? There are a lot of features in the, I wouldn't say the protocol, but even the desktop clients or even the command line tools that are very, very powerful in setting up a lot of the things that, quite honestly, is just not being presented to the end users, right? So, yeah, quite honestly, it's really just down to the developers to say and determine like what exactly is valuable for their business model in terms of presenting that experience to the end users, right? If it's exchange, there's no reason for them to do any of this kind of stuff, right? Just get a wallet, it's connected to an exchange, you can buy and sell, there you go, right? It's what else do you need?
So what about like dApps and other functionality being built on Bitcoin? Is this a functionality that you've considered that people are talking about? Or is this just something that's purely in the EVM side of things?
Yeah, so it's definitely not just on the EVM side, right? With Solana.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
But yeah, if you're talking strictly on Bitcoin side, like one of the things that with the opt-in wallet we're looking to do is create this kind of I I wouldn't necessarily say app marketplace because technically it's not an app, but it's more like these add-ons, right? A marketplace for all these add-ons. So right now, actually, it's good that you mentioned this. There is a guy who created a crowdfunding platform called fundme.cash. And, I reached out to him, like we've had a conversation and whatnot. He's actually starting to integrate that platform directly into the wallet. So the experience for that integration is actually fairly seamless because again, like for the architecture, for the entire chain, for all the kind of stuff, it's very, very compostable, right? So you can just swap in a part in and out, just combine them however you want, right? So with his set of contracts and the way that, like the opt-in wallet is currently designed to handle contracts, it's very, very much plug and play. So the eventual idea is that, like it wouldn't just be, like a crowdfunding platform or let's say a DAO or a token minter or whatnot. It will be a wide selection of all these different user flows. Like I would just put it that way, like user flows on what kind of experience you want to walk your users through.
Sweet. You used a good word there, because I think that segues me quite well into the thing that I was thinking of, that a lot of people in this space are trying to prioritize a little bit more UI UX, especially for onboarding flows, right? People love to beat crypto with this UI UX bat, saying, oh, the experience is terrible. You had to sign transaction, you had to use the seed phrases, yada, yada, yada. I find, yes, it's complicated, but you kind of get over it if you do it for a little bit. But is there anything in here that you've considered specifically as part of your flow, as part of your experience with the option app?
I think and for those who've known me, I think most people have seen my contrarian, like viewpoints and whatnot. But I actually think a lot of the UI UX flows have been dumbing down a lot of the actual experience. Like, don't get me wrong, it looks great, but if you strip away all of the nice colorings and all the quote unquote makeup and whatnot, like just strip away all of that stuff and look at the functionalities, it's very, very limiting, right? And it has been limiting for the last, like 6 to 8 years or so on and so forth, right? However long these mobile wallets have been really popular, it hasn't really changed, right? It's the same kind of baseline functionality, and it hasn't really expanded people's horizons. So, yeah, I get that, like, you don't want, like, non-technical people to be putting their life savings and whatnot into these wallets. Great. But at the same time, for the technically savvy people, you don't want to limit their capabilities too, right? So it's kind of like you're not satisfying either or of that spectrum. So for me, like the philosophy, or at least the viewpoint that I'm trying to go for, is that why not try to just enable as much features as possible for everyone to use? Like if you want to expose your private keys, here you go. Here are your private keys. Like the whole point of the covenants and all the stuff that we're working with is such that even if your private keys get compromised, because, again, going back to the analogy of a programmable check, if you already specified who the recipients are and how much payout they need to get, if anyone makes anything different, it's like, hey, you need to pay to Alice for 1 Bitcoin. If you try to pay to Bob for 1.1 Bitcoin, that doesn't work, right? It just does not work. So that's where, like, enable people, right? Show them what's actually possible, and let them decide, like let them decide on what kind of combination of, tech or security models and whatnot that they want to use, that they want to, promote their users. Let the market decide afterwards, right? Build better wallets.
Nice. So have you got any initial indications as to what these alpha users are? You in the alpha stage of opt-in?
Alpha, beta. I mean, at this point, I just want people to use it, right?
Cool.
But right now, it's mostly for, like developers. It's still early stages, right? But yeah, mostly geared towards other developers who've, like created these kinds of, like applications, but mostly on web, right? So there's no native mobile experience. And again, like with all the architecture and stuff, it's a lot easier to port over all of those, like smart contract or contract experiences and whatnot with something like, like Bitcoin Cash and stuff.
Okay. So is there any early indications as to the feature set that they're vibing with the most that you'd like to build out a little bit more?
I mean, right now, mostly it's, like anything that's, like financial in nature. So again, like going back to the crowdfunding platform, fundme.cash, it's completely non-custodial. The current issue is, like someone has to host it, so all that information has to go there. But yeah, the idea is, you have different entry points, right? You don't have to just go onto their website. You can use a mobile phone, right? You can completely bypass their front-end website. You can custom tailor that kind of experience, right? So that's where, like we want to, like reach out to some of the other developers in the space, whether they're Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatnot. To me, it doesn't really matter, right? Because again, like there's so much more tools to help that transition that it's a non-factor. Ultimately, what I would say is that, like for a lot of these apps, it's really comparing them to what solutions we have today, right? A lot of, and quite honestly, one of the major issues these days is, like you're hearing repeated news about exchanges getting their keys compromised, any sort of, spoofing or phishing, like UI UXs and whatnot. And the user at the behind the scene, they can't really see, like, is this actually a legitimate, prompt, or is it a scam, right? So there are, inherent advantages in different technologies and like different areas and whatnot. So yeah, quite honestly, I don't subscribe into the model of like king of the hill and like one winner takes all, right? One size fits all, right? I do believe that there is a healthy mosaic or like kind of like arrangement of where certain tech is applicable and best suited for these kind of uses. And quite a lot like what people are talking about in terms of interchain interoperability, all that kind of stuff. Why would you need to like be forced onto just one chain all by itself and never getting off, right? Without the option of going off.
Nice, nice. So yeah, I was going to ask you, in a world of widespread adoption, what space do you believe BTC and Bitcoin Cash based applications will have? Firstly, what does adoption look like to you?
Adoption would basically be, people in the developing country using this tech a lot more, right? A lot more pervasively into society. Not the developed country, because quite honestly, the technology and all the infrastructure and whatnot it's already there. You don't need to use it. But yeah, for a lot of the developing countries, it's basically a tool to leapfrog the technology gap, right? So yeah, like I think for a lot of these success cases, people have based it too much on the dollar value, whereas they're not looking at it from the physical, tangible results and the outcomes, right? If there are, like villages and whatnot in Africa getting whatever crypto and they're able to do, whatever to community for farming, whatever, right? That's tangible outcome that we can measure and whatnot. Whereas if you're just talking about dollar or numbers going up, I can bring out a Zimbabwe dollar and that has a lot more zeros than whatever, that we have.
Could you give us some insight into the team building OPTN? How's this development going? And firstly, can people download it today and get involved?
Yeah, the team is largely been me and ChatGPT, so I gotta thank OpenAI for that. But yeah, like I did get a working installer file for people to test out. Hopefully, we can get this app launched onto Google Play sometime this year, sometime in the summer this year. Um, and yeah, like in terms of team building, is really just trying to reach out to as many people as possible, trying to like, tell them not just about the wallet, but also what is Bitcoin Cash, what is all these differentiating factors, all this kind of stuff, right? So, like obviously it's a lot easier to integrate both Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash onto one platform rather than some other chain. But yeah, overall, it's just doing the outreach, showing people what this is, showing people how, on a most technical basis, how it can be different, right? With the opt-in wallet, I've literally gone up to people. It's like, hey, here is the contract. Here is a private key to unlock the contract. Have fun with it. And they'll be struggling. It's like, hey, I can't send this to anyone else. It's like, yeah, because you're forced to pay out to certain people, right? So it's also, like that kind of showcasing what that difference in user experience would look like.
Right. So, okay, that's cool. So are there any resources or any socials of yours that you'd like to share? So where people can get in touch with you, learn more about the opt-in wallet, maybe even try it out.
Yeah, so people can go to optinlabs.com to see the website. There's a link in there for both the APK installer file for Android, as well as a link to join the Telegram group. Other than that, yeah, no, it's fairly grassroots. We're trying to get to a better app stage to showcase to consensus, right? To the consensus, so Toronto week. But yeah, overall, just go to optinlabs.com. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Lightswarm. Or just find me on on LinkedIn. It's Jerry Qian, Qien. And yeah, like happy to talk, happy to chat. As long as you're not going to spam me on whatever deals or sales pitches and whatnot, it's like I'm happy to chat.
So you mentioned consensus. We got Futurist and Consensus coming up in the next 6 months. Is Bitcoin Bay up to anything special for these events?
We're planning a few side events during that week. So I think we're going to be having our regular Bitcoin Bay meetup on the Monday, and we're actively looking for a different venue to have a lot more people. I think we're also going to be planning for an event for demos and pitches. Basically want to get people out, like showcase what they've been working on to a lot more international crowd, right? So hopefully we can also pull in some investors, work with some other platforms, other partners and whatnot. And yeah, just basically bring that kind of like community collaborative vibes to these events.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jerry. So on that note, I think we should be wrapping it up for today. Jerry Qian, thank you so much for taking the time out to come see me over here and record this episode. I'm looking forward to checking out OPTN myself. As an Android user, I love the ability to just download APKs and do whatever I like. So
just enable your developer options.
You press the 5 button, you tap the screen 5 times, and you're a developer. I've done that. I'm now a developer. So from rainy Toronto, this is Marv, and this is Jerry signing off from Is This the New Internet? You take care, and we catch you on the next one. See ya.